Good morning, grade 9. We're going to explain about the respiratory system. Even though I sent for you a video about respiratory system before in the previous group, where you noticed the parts of the respiratory system and you observed the pathway of oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the respiratory system, but now we are going to explain it in more detail. First, we are going to list the functions of the respiratory system. The respiratory system allows to move oxygen. As you saw in the video, it moves the oxygen from the air to inside the body. This oxygen is needed for cellular respiration into body tissues, and also to remove the carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of cellular respiration from cells. So the respiratory system has two functions. First, to move the oxygen into the tissues, and next, to remove the carbon dioxide, which is a waste from the cells. Here is a picture of the human respiratory system, which shows the nasal cavity that where the air moves and circulates from the air into the nose. It moves in the nasal cavity, and then it moves to the pharynx. This pharynx is a common pathway, as you see or as you saw in the video sent before. The pharynx is a common pathway for food and air. So the oxygen or the air moves in the nasal cavity to the pharynx, then to the larynx. Above the larynx, as you see, we have an epiglottis. This epiglottis makes sure that the oxygen enters to the trachea and the food enters to the esophagus. So without the epiglottis, the food may enter into the trachea or the air may enter into the esophagus, but the epiglottis closes the esophagus when we are inhaling and closes the trachea when we are swallowing food. So the air now is in the larynx. The larynx is also called the voice box because it is from where the air moves into the vocal cords to speak. Then after the larynx we have the trachea. So again, the air moves in the nasal cavity, down to the pharynx, down to the larynx, and then to the trachea. This is called the air pathway. After that, the area branches into two bronchi, as you see. Each bronchus enters to a lung. The bronchus inside the lung branches into smaller bronchioles. As you see, we have lots of bronchioles inside each lung. These bronchioles end up with a sac called alveoli. Alveoli are air sacs found at the end of each bronchiole. It is where the gas exchange takes place. Now we are going to explore about the alveoli, but before that we are going to explain how the air moves in and out. This in details is cancelled, but you have to have a general information about it. When we inhale, the air moves in. What helps the air to move in? This muscle just under the lungs. This muscle is called the diaphragm. When the diaphragm contracts, it moves downward, so the lungs open and expand, and the rib cage expands, so the air moves in. On the opposite way, the diaphragm relaxes upward during exhalation, and the thoracic cage or the rib cage contracts, causing the lungs to compress, and then pushes the air out. So during inhalation, the diaphragm again contract, it moves downward, the lungs open, and the air moves in. During exhalation, the muscle of the diaphragm relaxes upward and the lungs compress, causing the air to move out of the body. Said about the alveoli, you can see this is the bronchiole. At the end of the bronchiole, look at these tiny sacs at the end of the bronchiole. These sacs are called the alveoli or alveolar sacs. As you see, these alveolar sacs are connected to a wide network of blood vessels. Did you see the red and the blue capillaries here? These are blood capillaries that connect the alveoli to the blood. There is also a membrane here. They said that it is an oily surfactant that prevents the alveolar walls from collapsing and sticking together because they are very small and they are too many. As you see, they are empty from inside, they are hollow. Here is the air, It enters into the alveolar sacs and then it moves to the blood, and we're going to explain how this happens. So, in the alveolar air, as you see, the oxygen enters to the alveoli. After that, the oxygen has to diffuse into the blood. On the contrary, the carbon dioxide, which is in the blood, that comes out from the cells as waste products, have to move out of the blood into the alveolar air. Here is the gas exchange. This is called the gas exchange, where the oxygen moves from the alveolar sac to the blood, and the carbon dioxide moves from the blood to the alveolar sacs. Explanation for that, here you see that the air that is entering the lungs, here is the air in the alveolus. Did you see here? This is the alveolar air. The air that enters the lungs contain more oxygen and less carbon dioxide. So the oxygen moves from the alveolar air to the blood, and the carbon dioxide moves from the blood to the alveolar air. Notice something here, that when the oxygen enters into the blood, the red blood cells change color. Yani when the hemoglobin reacts with the hemoglobin in the blood cells, this was explained in the video before, it makes it bright in color, bright red in color. It was dark red, and it changes into bright red when it reacts with oxygen. How does this difference in concentrations assist the gas exchange? Let's explain this. For example, if the concentration of oxygen in the alveolar air is high, it is 98 milliliter of mercury, this is the pressure, and in the blood it is 50 millimeter Hg, 50 milliliter mercury. Here I got for you this for one reason, because in the exams you will be asked to compare the concentrations, and you have to remember that we said when I say compare, you have to use comparative adjectives like more than, greater than, less than, and we use the numbers. So we say here that the pressure of oxygen in the air of the alveolar sac is 98 millimeter of mercury, which is greater than the pressure of oxygen in the blood, 50 millimeter of mercury. While if you see the carbon dioxide, the pressure of carbon dioxide in the alveolar air is 45 millimeter Hg, which is less than the pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood, which is 78 millimeter Hg. This is the comparison. From this comparison, what do we conclude? We conclude that the oxygen will diffuse from high pressure to low pressure. Always diffusion happens from high to low. For that, oxygen is diffused from the alveolar air to the blood. So from the alveolus to the blood. On the contrary, carbon dioxide is diffused from the blood to the alveolus. Why? Because the pressure here is more. So we compare the values by using greater than and less than. Then what do we conclude? We conclude the direction of diffusion. Always it moves from high pressure to low pressure. So oxygen diffuses from the alveolar sacs to the blood, while carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood to the alveolar sacs. There is in the red blood cell something called hemoglobin. So as we said, first the oxygen diffuses through lung capillary wall. How? The hemoglobin binds the oxygen that diffuses into the bloodstream. So once the oxygen is in the blood, the hemoglobin, which is found in the red blood cell, binds to hemoglobin, forming oxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin means hemoglobin with oxygen. Then later, when they reach the cells, the oxygen diffuses from the capillary to the tissue. So it was with hemoglobin, then it leaves the hemoglobin. As you see, the oxygen is alone now, goes out from the hemoglobin, and it goes to the body cell. So first the oxygen binds or reacts with the hemoglobin, forming oxyhemoglobin. Then this oxyhemoglobin will leave the hemoglobin, and it will be decomposed into oxygen alone and hemoglobin alone. So here, binding to hemoglobin, forming oxyhemoglobin, then this oxyhemoglobin will release the oxygen alone. Then how is the carbon dioxide transported? We said that first the carbon dioxide will be in the body cells because it's a waste product produced by the body cells. These balls are the carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide first diffuses from the cell to the blood. Again, because here we have high concentration. Did you see the concentration of carbon dioxide in the cell? It is high. So the carbon dioxide moves from the cell to the hemoglobin, but not only to the hemoglobin, also to the plasma. 70% of the carbon dioxide is dissolved in the plasma, forming bicarbonate ions here. And the other part will react with hemoglobin, but most carbon dioxide move in the plasma in the dissolved form. Some carbon dioxide can bind to hemoglobin for transport. The same thing happens opposite to what happened with oxygen. The carbon dioxide now bind with hemoglobin to form carbohemoglobin, and it is carried to the lungs. In the lungs, the carbon dioxide diffuses from the hemoglobin to the lungs. So again, it binds to hemoglobin in the cell, forming carbohemoglobin. In the lungs, the hemoglobin leaves, the carbon dioxide leaves the hemoglobin to go to the lungs. At the cells, what happens? Why does the oxygen move from the blood to the cells and the carbon dioxide moves from the cells to the blood? Because the cells use oxygen quickly for cellular respiration. What does this do to the diffusion gradient? How does this help the cells to take up oxygen? Let us see how. This makes the diffusion of oxygen from the blood to the cells because we have less oxygen in the cells. So the oxygen moves from blood, from high concentration, to the cells which have low concentration of oxygen. Also, the cells create carbon dioxide during cellular respiration. So carbon dioxide levels in the cell are higher than in the blood coming to them. So what happens here? The carbon dioxide diffuses from the cells, high concentration, to the blood, which is low concentration. So because the carbon dioxide in the cells is higher than, this is the comparison, it is higher than in the blood. So the carbon dioxide moves from the cells to the blood. This is diffused. Finally, we are going to know what makes the alveoli a good surface of exchange. So why it is a good surface of exchange? Because it has thin walls. The alveoli are very thin and they have a large surface area. You have millions of alveoli in the two lungs. Finally, third, it is rich in blood vessels. This richness in blood vessels help it to be a good surface of exchange. The same happens in the villi. If you remember, in the small intestine, they have thin walls, they have a large surface area, and they are rich in blood vessels, which makes them a good surface of exchange. Finally, let us sum up what we learned in this lesson. We learned that the oxygen pathway is from the nose to the pharynx, to the larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, alveoli, blood, and then it moves to the cells. This was a homework from the previous video. This is the correction. Carbon dioxide pathway is from the cells to the blood, alveoli, bronchioles, bronchi, trachea, larynx, pharynx, and then nose. As you notice, it is the opposite of the pathway of oxygen. We also took two equations. Oxygen plus hemoglobin produces oxyhemoglobin. This happens at the level of the lungs in this way, but at the level of the cells, it happens in the opposite way. The oxyhemoglobin will give hemoglobin plus oxygen. For that, it's necessary to write two arrows because this is a reversible equation. If they ask you only in the lungs, you write it in this way. Only in the cells, you write it in that way. But if it is only an equation, you have to put the two arrows. Similarly, carbon dioxide plus hemoglobin gives carbohemoglobin. This in the cells and in the lungs, the opposite will happen. Also, we learned that hemoglobin is dark red in color. When it reacts with oxygen, it changes into bright red. Diffusion is the movement of particles from high pressure to low pressure. And most oxygen is carried by hemoglobin in the form of oxyhemoglobin. Most carbon dioxide is dissolved in the plasma in the form of bicarbonate. Some is carried by hemoglobin in the form of carbohemoglobin. This is the lesson of respiratory system. This is the summary and the explanation of the chapter. After this video, I'm going to give you exercises to solve. Study well and stay tuned for the exercises. Stay safe. Thank you.